shadows of the basement again. The house had a way of keeping time wrong. Claire first noticed it in the way the kitchen clock drifted a minute backward when storm clouds rolled in, as if the rooms argued with the day. She came back to settle papers and the attic of small obligations that follow a death. But the house was less a building than a patient thing with hours all its own. Her aunt had called the basement nonsense, and when Claire found the rusted key in an old coat pocket, she felt the pull of a place that remembered. At night, the house rearranged its sounds. Upstairs, the floorboards said ordinary things pipes, settling wood. But below there was a low, patient hum like a refrigerator tuned to a memory. Claire told herself it was the house breathing. She told herself more usefully that houses remember. Friends offered explanations: mice, old wiring, loneliness. But in the margin of every reasonable idea sat a small, persistent image, a shadow at the bottom step that never quite obeyed the lamp. The key fit better than Claire expected. It turned with a small protest, the lock catching on old metal like a throat clearing. The basement door opened into a breath colder than the rest of the house, and for a moment she lingered there, hand braced on warped wood, wondering how many times a single threshold could mean different things. In the floor's damp scent and the metallic echo of her key, she heard old afternoons and a hush that felt almost deliberate, as if someone were cataloging what she let in. She went down with an oil lamp she found in a kitchen drawer, brass, smudged glass, a wick trimmed by a careful, patient hand. The stairs inhaled the light and swallowed most of it, leaving ribbons that clung to the rails. Sound receded with each step, then shifted, as if instead of following her down, it smoothed a way to watch. The basement smelled of damp paper and old wood. Something else lay under those scents, a faint acidity, like thinking too long about something you could barely remember. On the concrete floor, she found an arrangement like an offering, a small tape recorder with its red indicator dark, but warm to the touch, a stack of curled Polaroids splayed like a slow deck of cards, and a cracked mirror propped against a crate. Someone had left these out, as if expecting a return. The mirror's hairline fractures refracted her lamp into thin, accusing lines, and the Polaroids tasted of dust and slight mildew. The air itself felt tuned, waiting to be plucked. She reached for the recorder and found it warmer than the air, as if it had been holding a breath. When she pressed play, static first, then a voice like paper rubbing, then a sound she recognized with the hollow certainty of memory, her own name. The tape did not begin at some innocent time in the past. It started in the small quiet between her heartbeat and her breath, with details that were stitched to tonight. Listening, Claire felt the room measure her by degrees and note the way she swallowed. Each Polaroid told a slightly different story about the same corners. One photo showed the stairs from the basement's angle, empty. Another showed the stairs with a shadow, longer than the lamp's reach. A third showed the mirror. Yet, in that picture, the mirror reflected a small, additional door that did not exist. The images moved like heartbeats out of sync. Claire found herself comparing them to the room, as if the house were a photographer that altered negatives to see what happened next. When she looked in the mirror full on, she expected the same damp concrete and her tired face, but the surface offered a version of the basement where angles were wrong, and a rack of boxes sat where nothing stood in the actual room. The reflection lagged a heartbeat behind her movement, like a record played on a slightly slower machine. She made a small face, and the mirror hesitated, then matched it, too obedient, like someone copying gestures to learn how a person breathed. She tried to leave and found the stairs longer. The top seemed a step away and a mile away at once, an optical argument between solid construction and the house's appetite. The lamp felt heavier, and each motion surprised both her and the room. Upstairs, footsteps stopped like a companion listening. No one came. The door's latch resisted deliberately, as if the house wanted a promise and not a gesture. Claire learned that exits can be negotiations, not certainties. That evening, the tape delivered a different voice, less like memory and more like a patient report. It recited details, small, private things she had no reason to think aloud. The chipped enamel cup she left in the sink, the name she used only when she was angry. The recorder did not simply repeat, it suggested, folded suggestions into questions, until Claire began answering them out loud to the dark. The voice behaved like weather, shaping the space until she resettled to fit its pressure. She tested the house in other, small ways. She told herself she would not step back down, but curiosity proved a persistent thing. On a second visit, the mirror showed a framed photograph on a shelf that did not exist. The Polaroids rearranged themselves slightly between glances, offering a slow choreography. The shadow at the bottom step began to mimic her moods, compressing when she laughed and stretching when she hesitated, as if lighting were learning to read the shape of her choices. The logic that saved her before, blame a house, blame fatigue, softened under repetition. The most terrifying thing was smallness, the idea that a place could be patient enough to wait for a person to rebuild themselves into a habit worth recording. She understood, in a way that left a numb space under her tongue, that the recorder did not only chart what had happened, it anticipated, nudged, and catalogued her choices as if they were specimens. She felt watched by a careful intelligence that preferred to learn. In the last scene, she left the door cracked, a rationed opening to daylight. She told herself she would never come back and walked away with the key in her pocket like a rumor. Nights passed, and the house continued its patient business, unlatching tiny mechanisms of memory. On the third night, she received a short voice message. Her phone vibrated with a new recording. When she listened, there was only her own breath, recorded slow and exact, and then a quiet click as if the house were closing its script for the night. It was not violence. It was something quieter and more determined, an unfinished sentence that kept speaking.